I arrived at my daughter's house just before sunset. She had invited me for dinner, and I could already smell something warm and comforting drifting out from the kitchen. The little house had a cozy glow, the kind that usually brought me peace, but that evening something felt slightly different. The air was heavy, like the calm before a storm. My daughter smiled when she saw me, pulling me into a hug, but her eyes looked tired. She brushed it off, saying work had been long, yet I sensed more behind her words. Her husband came in shortly after, dressed neatly as always, his smile polished like a businessman trying to sell trust. He was polite to me, even charming, but there was a restlessness in the way he kept checking his phone. Every few minutes, he excused himself to take calls, stepping out into the hallway or lowering his voice in the next room. I noticed how his tone changed sharp, urgent, and nothing like the easy voice he used at the dinner table during the meal. He asked my daughter to sign a few papers he had placed at her side earlier that day. She laughed it off, saying she hadn't looked at them yet. He squeezed her hand a little too tightly and whispered that she should just trust him. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I said nothing, but inside my stomach tightened. When night fell and everyone had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I wandered quietly through the hall, the floor creaking under my steps. That's when I noticed the light spilling from the study door. It was cracked open just enough for voices to slip out. His voice, low, controlled, but filled with tension. I froze, every instinct telling me to turn away, yet my feet stayed planted. I leaned closer, careful not to make a sound. Her savings will be easy to move. She trusts me too much to question anything. By the time she notices, I'll have secured the assets. If she starts asking questions, I'll keep her quiet until things blow over. My breath caught in my throat. My knees went weak, and I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. My daughter, my only child, was sleeping peacefully down the hall. Completely unaware that the man she trusted was plotting against her, he chuckled softly into the phone, the kind of laugh that chilled me. She'd never see it coming. My pulse hammered in my ears. My chest felt tight as if the walls themselves were closing in. Every word pressed against me like a weight I couldn't carry. I stumbled back a step, covering my mouth to stop any sound from escaping. I had seen dishonesty before in strangers, but hearing it in my own home, from my son-in-law, cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just money he was planning to take, it was her future, her peace, her trust. Quietly, I turned and tiptoed away, each step heavier than the last. My hands shook as I reached for the wall, clutching it for balance. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would give me away. When I finally reached my room, I shut the door gently, pressed my back against it, and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. I placed my hand over my heart as if holding it in place, whispering to myself, did I just hear my son-in-law plotting against my own daughter? Sleep never came that night. Only questions. Only fear. Only the start of something I knew would change everything. I told myself I might have misheard. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my mind filled in the worst parts. In the morning light, doubt is loud and reasonable. I made tea and watched the sun lift over the fence. It painted the kitchen in a soft gold, the kind of light that should have made everything feel safe. It didn't. Every sound in the house felt sharper. A drawer sliding, a spoon against a cup, the click of his phone case. I asked my daughter if she slept well. She said yes, smiled, and kissed my cheek. Her eyes held a calm that I couldn't share. I decided to look for proof of peace. That was my bargain with myself. If I could find even one ordinary sign, I would let last night go. But ordinary signs hid from me. He came into the kitchen with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, and a voice too bright for morning. He set a thin stack of papers on the counter beside my daughter's coffee. "Just sign where I've marked," he said, tapping the yellow tabs. "Routine stuff." "What kind of routine?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Insurance updates," he said smoothly. "Household admin." "Boring, really." My daughter winked at me, teasing. "You know he handles all the adult things?" "I'm the artsy one." She laughed, and I tried to laugh too, but the sound stuck in my throat. She picked up a pen, then paused and blew on her coffee instead. He placed a gentle hand on her wrist, guiding the pen back. Not rough, not kind. Just certain. A delivery arrived before she could sign. The doorbell rang and rang again. He hurried to the entryway and came back with a large box, heavy and expensive looking. A second box followed. "Samples," he said when I raised a brow. "Client gifts." But when he opened them, I saw the gleam of a new watch, the kind with a face like a dark moon, and a band that looked like quiet wealth. Another box held limited edition sneakers his size. He smiled as he laced them, pride flickering across his face like a flash of a camera. "Client gifts don't usually come in your size," I said softly. He looked up. "Perks," he said, and tied the knot dot. He was careful about his tone with me, always clean and neutral. But with my daughter, he let himself be a little more certain, more blunt. At lunch, he slid the papers back in front of her. "We said we'd get this done," he reminded. She skimmed a line, then two. Her lips moved as she read, but only a little. "I trust you," she said, and she signed the first page without finishing the paragraph. My hand twitched. I wanted to pull the pen right out of her fingers, but I also wanted not to be the mother who meddled and got it wrong. I counted my breaths and looked out the window to keep from speaking. By afternoon, he had another call. His voice cooled to business. "Yes, by Friday," I heard him say as he walked down the hall. "No, she won't be a problem." He shut the office door. The lock clicked. A strange sound in a family home at 2 in the afternoon. I baked a pie because doing something with my hands helps me think. The scent filled the kitchen. My daughter hummed while she loaded the dishwasher. She wore the locket I gave her when she turned 16, a small oval with a tiny dent near the hinge. She touches it when she's nervous, the way some people wring their hands. She wasn't touching it now. She was relaxed, trusting, soft. She believed she was loved and safe. I watched her, and the fear in me changed shape into a heavier thing. Not a sharp alarm anymore. A slow grief. "Do you ever read what you sign?" I asked, dusting flour from my palms. She smiled. "I read the important things." "How do you know what's important?" "I know because I know him," she said, as if it were the simplest truth. He would never hurt me, I wanted to say last night. I wanted to tell her every word I heard, each piece like a stone in my mouth. But truth without proof can look like jealousy or control, or the past leaking into the present. I remembered the first year after my husband died, when every warning sounded like someone trying to run my life for me. I remembered how I tuned them out, even when they were right. I swallowed and nodded and said nothing. Later, while the pie cooled, my daughter went upstairs to shower. He stayed in the living room, claiming a call. He spoke quietly, pacing, a cat on a narrow fence. I stayed near the hallway with a magazine I wasn't reading. When he passed me, he smiled the kind of smile that says he saw me before I saw him. "Everything okay?" He asked. "Of course," I said. "Good," he said. He went into the study again. I heard the desk drawer open. A softer sound followed, like a velvet-lined box sliding inside a larger wooden one. A tiny click. I don't know why I know the language of locks, but I do. I recognized the sound of a key turn. My chest tightened. When the study door opened, he came out with empty hands and an easy stride. "I'm going to pick up dinner," he called up to my daughter. "Your favorite?" The door closed behind him. The car started. The car left. The house was quiet except for the shower running upstairs. I stood there barefoot and felt the weight of the quiet press me forward. I walked into the study like a woman stepping onto a frozen pond, cautious, listening for cracks. The room smelled like leather and printer ink. His desk was neat in a way that didn't feel natural, too aligned, too staged. I pulled the top drawer, pens, a stapler, a charger. The second drawer, receipts, cables. Then the third, the one he had opened. It didn't budge. Black dot on the desk. A small scratch near the right corner looked newer than the others, like a ring had scraped the finish. Beside it, an empty coaster. I ran a finger under the lip of the drawer, feeling for a catch. Nothing. I checked the bookshelves for a key. The bowl by the lamp, the little wooden box that held cufflinks. No key. I stood still and told myself to leave. Then I noticed the leather folder stood upright behind the printer, almost hidden by a stack of old magazines. It was thicker than a normal file, heavy-looking, with a tiny brass tab. No label. I slid it out. It was locked with a small clasp, no more serious than a diary lock. But it snapped tight when I tugged Dot. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I slid the folder back exactly where it had been, aligned the magazines, and left the room. My heart was explaining things to me very fast. There's something in there. He keeps it hidden. If you open it without care, you will lose your chance to prove anything. Proof matters. Proof is the difference between a story and a case. At dinner, he brought home takeout in neat white boxes, folded closed like secret letters. My daughter laughed and thanked him. He poured wine and touched the back of her chair. The papers appeared again as if they had always been part of the meal. He turned pages toward her hand. "We're almost done," he said. She signed another one. Then another. My throat burned. I tried small, practical objections. Shouldn't you at least date them? But he had an answer for everything. "We'll notarize later," he said, already stacking the pages, the yellow tabs fluttering like tiny flags of surrender. His phone buzzed, and he didn't excuse himself this time. He answered at the table. "Yes," he said. "Friday. No delays." He listened, eyes on my daughter's face. Not the floor, not the ceiling, as if her image was the battery of his lies. When he hung up, he noticed me watching him and smiled again. A thin, fixed thing. That night, I lay awake and practiced all the paths. Confront him, and he will deny it. Tell her without proof, and she will defend him. Wait and gather proof, and I risk time I might not have. I weighed love against time. Love said protect her now. Time said protect her well. I have learned the price of rushing. I have also learned the price of silence. Somewhere between them, there is a small bridge where a mother can stand. Over the next 2 days, more deliveries came. A new coat for him, the kind that looks simple until you touch it and feel the weight of the cloth. A set of wireless speakers for the office, still in their boxes. He posted a photo of a fancy cocktail on his social media at lunch, tagged at a place where the napkins are black and the lights are low. My daughter saw it and typed little hearts. He replied with a lightning bolt and a crown. When I asked him gently about money, he laughed. "We're investing," he said. "Making moves. Don't worry your head with the details." When I asked her if they were saving, she said, "Of course," and rested her head on his shoulder. He kissed her hair and looked at me over the curve of her cheek. His eyes cool as glass dot. I kept moving through the house like smoke, light, and harmless. I learned the rhythm of his keys and the times he forgot them. I learned the pattern of his calls. I learned the small habits of his carelessness, how he always left his laptop bag by the hall table, how he sometimes put the study key in the ceramic dish, and sometimes in his blazer pocket. I learned to wait on the third evening. As the sky turned the color of a bruise and the streetlights clicked on one by one, he stood at the kitchen island with my daughter tucked against him. He told a story about a client who tried to back out of a deal. He made it sound funny and harmless. She laughed and poured him more wine. I stood by the sink, washing a plate that was already clean. He looked up at me as if something had just occurred to him. The way you look at a clock and remember an appointment, you always hear too much, he said lightly. Almost like a joke, the room seemed to draw a slow breath. My daughter looked between us, puzzled. He took a sip, never breaking eye contact with me, and smiled. I smiled back because that is what you do when a snake shows you its pattern. And under my calm face, I made a promise to myself. I will hear exactly enough. The chance came on a Thursday afternoon, a day that pretended to be ordinary. My daughter had gone to meet a friend for coffee, leaving me to fold laundry in the living room. He was pacing near the window, tapping at his phone, dressed sharper than usual, dark jacket, polished shoes, hair slicked with too much care for a simple errand. When a call came through, he stepped into the hall, his voice low but edged with impatience. Yes, I'm on my way now. No, she doesn't suspect anything. It'll all be in her name by Monday. I held a shirt in my hands, my knuckles whitening around the fabric. He ended the call, grabbed his keys, and left in a hurry. My body moved before my mind fully agreed. I pulled on my coat, slipped into my shoes, and followed. His car gleamed black against the dull sky. I kept a distance far enough that he wouldn't see me in his rearview mirror. My heart beat so fast it seemed to fill the silence of my car. The streets blurred as I tailed him, every turn a question of whether I should keep going. But when you know your child is in danger, fear is not an option, it becomes a tool, sharpening you. He pulled up outside a hotel on the edge of the business district, one of those sleek glass towers that looked like it had no place for family warmth. Only money, only power. He handed his keys to the valet with a careless smile. I parked 2 blocks away, my hands trembling as I locked my car. Inside the lobby, I kept my distance, pretending to study a vase of white lilies while he moved toward the elevators. He checked his watch, glanced around, and stepped in. I caught the door just before it closed, lowering my head as if I was fumbling for something in my purse. He didn't notice me. The elevator hummed upward, numbers glowing until we stopped at the 12th floor. The corridor smelled of new carpet and expensive cologne. I followed the sound of voices until I reached a conference room at the far end. The door wasn't shut completely, just left ajar. Through the gap, I saw him sit at a long table with 3 men. One wore a tailored suit so sharp it could cut glass. A lawyer, I thought. His silver cufflinks flashed when he moved. Another was younger, restless, tapping a pen against a thick folder, an investor, eager but cold. And then there was the third, broad shoulders, scar on his cheek, the kind of man who carried silence like a weapon. His voice was gravel when he finally spoke. If she finds out, it's over. You understand me? My breath caught. I pressed myself closer to the wall, heart slamming against my ribs, till my son-in-law leaned forward, all confidence. She won't find out. Everything is under her name. By the time anyone notices, the money will already be shifted. The properties, the accounts secured. She just looked like the reckless one who lost it all. Not me. The lawyer nodded approvingly. Risky, but smart. Using her name keeps your hands clean. The younger man flipped through documents. We'll need her signature on the transfer papers. Without it, the banks won't move. She signs whatever I put in front of her, my son-in-law said smoothly, and laughter rippled around the table. Except for the scarred man. He leaned forward, his voice low. Don't get sloppy. Wives notice things. Mothers notice more. A shiver ran down my spine so hard I had to grip the wall to stay standing. They continued talking about numbers. I couldn't follow millions, assets overseas, fake companies. Words that painted a future where my daughter stood in ruins, blamed for crimes she never committed. I imagined her confused face as strangers took her home, her bank accounts, her trust. My throat burned with rage, but my hands shook with fear. I couldn't storm in. Not yet. Without proof, I'd be brushed off as a bitter, meddling mother. But if I stayed too long, I'd risk everything. I turned, trying to retrace my steps back down the hall. The elevator dinged just then, and panic gripped me. Footsteps echoed closer. My son-in-law had stepped out, his phone pressed to his ear. He must have slipped away from the meeting for a moment. I flattened myself against the wall, my pulse thundering in my ears. I spotted a column near the lobby doors and slipped behind it just as he turned the corner. He paused, scanning the lobby like a man smelling smoke. My breath was shallow, every muscle tense. If he looked hard enough, he would see the truth in my eyes. Finally, he smirked at nothing, muttered into his phone, and strolled outside to wait for the valet. His car pulled up, and he drove off, oblivious. I stayed hidden a few seconds longer, my back pressed to the cold marble column. My heart wouldn't slow down, as if it knew the danger wasn't past. Only beginning. The days after the hotel shook me to my core. I tried to carry myself as if nothing had changed, but inside, every breath was heavier. My daughter chatted with me over breakfast, completely unaware of the storm hovering over her head. She twirled the little locket around her neck as she spoke her 16th birthday gift, a tiny oval of silver with a picture of us inside. She wore it every day, never once took it off. It had always comforted me, but now I noticed the way his eyes lingered on it. Not lovingly, possessively, as if even that heirloom was something he believed would one day be his. One evening, over dinner, he slid more documents across the table. "Just the usual updates," he said, his voice smooth but sharp around the edges. "Sign here, here, and here." My daughter laughed. "You're turning me into your secretary? You could at least read them," I said softly, trying to make it sound casual. He turned his gaze on me, his smile brittle. "That's why I handle things. To spare her the stress. Some people," he added pointedly, "just don't understand how business works." My daughter frowned at him. "Don't talk to her like that." His jaw tightened, but he leaned back in his chair and forced another smile. I was joking, except it wasn't a joke. The mask was slipping, and I could see the impatience simmering just below. That night, when they both went upstairs, I stayed behind. I gathered the papers left on the counter and slipped them into my bag. The next morning, I took a long walk into town, where an old copy shop still stood. The clerk didn't ask questions. I fed the papers into the machine, one by one, listening to the hum of truth being copied into safety. When I returned the originals, no one noticed. From that day forward, I made a habit of it. Papers left out, phone calls overheard, little pieces of evidence tucked quietly into my purse. I bought a small recorder and left it hidden in the living room once or twice when he was on calls. The snippets I caught made my blood run cold. The assets will all transfer under her name. She trusts me too much to question it. Once it's done, she'll be nothing but a liability. I saved every word. My daughter sensed something was off. She came to me one evening while brushing her hair, her reflection soft in the mirror. "He's been pushing me lately, always rushing me to sign things. Sometimes he gets angry if I don't." My chest tightened. "Angry how?" "Not violent, just sharp." His voice changes. She twisted the locket between her fingers. "But he loves me. He's stressed with work, that's all." I wanted to grab her shoulders and tell her everything, but the words lodged in my throat. Without proof, she might dismiss me. Worse, she might run straight to him. So I nodded, kissed her head, and said, Just be careful. Don't sign anything until you've read it twice. Her smile was sad. You worry too much, but I didn't. I worried exactly enough that the final crack in my patience came one late night. He thought the house was asleep. He spoke on the phone again in his study, the door only half closed. I crept closer, recorder in my pocket. His voice was sharp, clipped, impatient. She's nearly done signing everything. By next month, the accounts will be empty, the house mortgaged, and her name tied to every loan. She'd be ruined, and I'll be gone. A pause. Then he added, his tone softer, hungrier. I'll be with you. We'll leave the mess behind and start fresh. She'll never see it coming. My hand shook so hard I nearly dropped the recorder. Heat rushed through my fear and rage entwined. He wasn't just planning to strip my daughter of everything. He was planning to vanish with another woman, leaving her destroyed in every sense. I backed away slowly, each step measured, careful. But inside me, the storm broke. My daughter's life, her future, her trust, it was all hanging by a thread. And he was ready to cut it without looking back. I pressed my palm against the wall, forcing myself to breathe quietly, to steady the pounding of my heart. His words echoed in my head like a sentence carved in stone. By next month, she'd be ruined and I'll be gone. I learned quickly that if I wanted to protect my daughter, I had to keep my face calm, my voice even, and my footsteps light. On the surface, I smiled at him during meals, asked polite questions, even complimented his new tie. I played the role of the warm, slightly meddling mother-in-law who meant no harm. But under that mask, I was building my own quiet army. The first soldier in my corner was an old friend, Daniel, a liar I'd known for decades. He had helped me once with my late husband's estate, and I trusted him like I trusted few others. I invited him to meet for coffee in a small cafe tucked into the corner of town. When he walked in, tall and graying, carrying his leather briefcase, I felt the relief of seeing someone who still stood on the side of truth. I laid out pieces of what I'd gathered, copies of the papers, snippets from recordings, observations about his meetings. Daniel listened carefully, his brow furrowed, his fingers drumming lightly against the table. He's clever, Daniel said finally. Everything is under her name. If she signs these, she carry the legal burden, not him. What can I do? I asked, my voice trembling more than I wanted. Gather more. Don't confront him yet. If she doesn't believe you now, you'll lose her trust. Let him think he's winning. Then when the time comes, we'll show her everything in black and white. She'll have no choice but to see. I nodded, but my stomach nodded. Waiting felt like walking a rope over fire. Back at the house, I found another ally in an unexpected place. Mrs. Green, the neighbor across the street, had always been kind, always watching the neighborhood with sharp eyes. One afternoon, while trimming her roses, she leaned close and whispered, "He's been having men over when your daughter's not home." Not friends. Business types. They don't park out front, they park down the block. I thought you should know. Her words confirmed what I already feared. I thanked her, forcing a smile, but inside my resolve hardened. I wasn't imagining any of it. The pieces fit too perfectly dot still. The hardest battle wasn't with him. It was with my own daughter. One night, when he had gone out again for work, I sat with her in the living room. I reached for her hand. "Sweetheart, you need to slow down before signing anything else. Let me look over the papers with you." She pulled her hand away gently. "Mom, please. You've always thought no one is good enough for me. That's not true. It feels like it. You don't see how much he does for us. He takes care of things so I don't have to worry. And now you're digging, snooping." Her eyes welled up. "You're making me feel like I have to choose between you and him." The words cut deeper than any knife. I wanted to shout, to spill everything, but I knew the danger. If I spoke without proof, She would run further into his arms, the way frightened children do when they believe the world is against them. My silence tasted bitter, but I swallowed it anyway. That night, alone in my room, I stared into the mirror above the dresser. My reflection looked tired, older than the woman I remembered. But behind the lines of age, my eyes were steady. I thought about the choice before me: expose him now and risk losing her, or wait, let him tie his own rope and then pull. I remembered Daniel's advice. I remembered Mrs. Green's whispers. I remembered the recordings. Every piece was a card in my hand. I just had to play them in the right order. The heartbreak of my daughter's doubt lingered, but it also lit a fire. I realized that protecting her didn't mean shielding her from every hurt. Sometimes it meant letting the hurt land, letting the cracks form so she could see the truth herself. If she felt betrayed, if she saw the monster with her own eyes, only then would she believe me. So I decided to wait, to let the trap close halfway and spring it open on him. I would let him think he was the hunter while I stood quietly, weaving the net tighter and tighter around him. I leaned closer to the mirror, whispering so low I could barely hear myself. "You wanted a game, son. You've got one." The woman staring back at me didn't flinch. Weeks leading up to the confrontation felt like standing in the eye of a storm. Everything looked calm on the surface, but I could feel the swirling danger pressing in from all sides. Each morning, I carried myself as if nothing were wrong. I cooked, I laughed, I asked about his day. But underneath, every breath I took was measured. Every step rehearsed for the trap I was about to spring. The first step was convincing my daughter to slow down. One evening, while she was folding laundry in her bedroom, I sat on the edge of her bed. "Sweetheart, do me a favor. Don't sign anything else without me. Just humor me." She rolled her eyes playfully. "Mom, please," I pressed, softer now. "If I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But if I'm right, just promise me you'll wait." Her smile faltered, and she touched the locket at her throat. That gesture had become her anchor, though she didn't realize it. "Okay," she whispered. "For you." It was enough. From there, I focused on proof. I copied more documents, digging through the piles he left on his desk when he thought no one was watching. With Daniel's help, I connected the dots: offshore accounts, shell companies, property deeds, all pointing to a single conclusion. He was funneling everything under her name while he prepared to vanish clean. I kept recording his conversations. One clip captured him saying, "She's too blind to see it coming." Another, "We'll drain it dry, then disappear." The words stacked like bricks on the case I was building. Mrs. Green, my neighbor, agreed to testify if it came to that. She had seen the strange men arriving late at night, had even noted license plates. Each piece of evidence was another knot in the net. The tension reached its peak at a family gathering he insisted on hosting. He wanted to show off, to parade his success before friends and relatives. The dining room glowed with warm light, but the atmosphere was heavy with his arrogance. He moved through the room like a man who believed he owned it. Hand on my daughter's back, glass of wine raised high. At one point, he leaned close to me and said, low enough for only me to hear, "Funny how you're still here, watching me win." I smiled politely, but inside my pulse was steady. I had rehearsed this moment too many times to falter. Later, when the crowd settled in the living room with their drinks, I asked if I could borrow him for a moment. "Something about the documents," I said smoothly, and he followed me into the study, the same room where weeks earlier I had overheard his betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me. The walls that had once closed in with Furno stood ready to witness justice. On the desk sat a folder. He glanced at it, and his eyes lit with greed. "She finally signed?" he asked, his voice sharp with excitement. I slid it toward him. "All there." He snatched it up and flipped it open. For a moment, his expression was triumphant, as if he'd already tasted victory. But then his eyes darted back and forth across the pages, confusion settling in. These weren't signatures. They were photocopies of the papers he tried to trick her into signing, annotated in Daniel's handwriting. There were also bank statements, phone transcripts, even Mrs. Green's signed account. "What is this?" he hissed, the mask slipping completely now. "Evidence," I said simply. His face darkened. "You think this will stop me?" "Not me," I replied, my voice steady. "Them." At first he didn't understand. Then, faint in the distance, came the sound. Police sirens. Low at first, then rising, echoing through the night. His head jerked toward the window. He spun back to me, fury and panic colliding in his eyes. "What did you do?" I held his gaze, unflinching. "You wanted a game." I played it better. The sirens grew louder, closer, their red and blue lights now flickering against the curtains of the study. The same room where I once hid in fear was now the place where he finally realized the truth. His trap had been turned inside out. His mouth opened as if to shout, but the sound was swallowed by the knock at the door, sharp and commanding. The guests stirred in the living room, voices rising in confusion. My daughter's voice called out, worried, as footsteps approached. I stood tall, my hands folded calmly in front of me, while his grip tightened on the useless folder. His world was collapsing, and for the first time, he couldn't hide it. The siren screamed just outside, promising that the reckoning had arrived. The knock at the door came again, louder, urgent. Before he could move, uniformed officers stepped into the living room. Conversations froze mid-sentence, glasses hovered halfway to lips, and every head turned toward the front hall. My son-in-law straightened, folder clutched in his hand, a forced smirk on his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded, stepping out of the study just as two officers entered. "Sir," one of them said firmly, "we have a warrant for your arrest." Gasps rippled through the guests. Someone dropped their wine glass, the shatter echoing like thunder through the stunned silence. My daughter rushed forward, eyes wide. There must be some mistake. But there was no mistake. The officer stepped closer, reciting his rights. He tried to laugh it off, waving the folder in his hand. "This is ridiculous. I'm a businessman, not a criminal. You people don't understand." Another officer reached for his arm. He jerked back. "Don't touch me. Do you know who I am? Do you know how much I've built?" "Enough," the officer said, snapping the cuffs around his wrists with one clean motion. The smirk dissolved. His face turned red, then pale, then back again. "This is a setup," he shouted, turning toward the stunned family and friends. "She's behind this." His eyes locked on me, hatred burning. "She's been poisoning everyone against me." All eyes swung toward me. My daughter's especially wide, trembling, desperate. The truth was crashing into her like a wave, and I could see her fighting to breathe. Tears blurred her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you knew?" I nodded. My throat ached, but I said softly, "I couldn't let him take everything from you." The folder slipped from his bound hands and fell open on the floor. Documents scattered across the carpet, bank statements, forged signatures, offshore transfers. The evidence lay exposed under the chandelier's light, undeniable. The room filled with whispers. My daughter covered her mouth, then stumbled toward me. She collapsed against my shoulder, sobs racking her chest. "You saved me," she cried, the words muffled into my blouse. I held her, stroking her hair, my heart breaking and mending all at once. The officers led him toward the door, but he resisted every step. "You think this is the end?" he snarled at me over his shoulder. "My partners won't let this stand." "You'll regret this," but his partners had already begun their retreat. I saw it in their ice-cold men calculating risk. Without his shield of charm and confidence, he was nothing but liability. They turned away, whispering to each other, pulling out their phones. The scarred man who had once warned him looked at me with a smirk of bitter amusement, as if to say, I told him so. Then he too walked out, leaving my son-in-law to flounder alone by the next morning. The media storm had already ignited. Headlines blared about the fall of a rising entrepreneur, about the fraudulent empire built on lies. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, cameras flashing as he was led in, his head bowed, hair unkempt. The same man who once walked into rooms like he owned them, now shuffled like a caged animal. Cornered and stripped at home, the whispers of family still lingered. Some avoided me, too shaken by the truth, but others looked at me with new eyes. Eyes that understood endurance, patience, and the quiet strength it had taken to watch and wait for the right moment, in the quiet of the night. When the house finally settled, I sat with my daughter. She clutched the locket at her throat as though it might vanish if she let go. All this time, she whispered, I thought you were being hard on him. I thought I was defending my marriage. I didn't see. I kissed her temple, my eyes wet. You weren't supposed to see. Not until it was safe. She leaned into me, her voice a fragile thread. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to, I said, my voice breaking in spite of myself. You're safe. That's enough. I lay awake long after she had fallen asleep beside me on the couch. My mind replayed the years of quiet endurance nights when silence had been my only defense. Days when strength meant swallowing my pride. All of it had led to this moment. It wasn't vengeance I felt now, but clarity. I had acted not out of anger, but out of love sharpened into precision. Still, one thing lingered. His voice, his glare, the venom in his words as they dragged him out. The image returned as sharply as if he stood before me again. His wrists in steel, his face twisted in fury, his voice low and venomous. This isn't over. The memory chilled me, because deep down I knew he meant it. The weeks that followed felt like living in the shadow of a storm finally past. The air was clearer, but the ground was still wet and heavy. My daughter moved through the house like someone waking from a long, dark dream. At first, she flinched at every knock on the door, every phone call, every headline that flashed her husband's name. She carried the shame of it on her shoulders, even though none of it belonged to her. I stayed close. I cooked her favorite meals, sat with her when she couldn't sleep, walked with her when she needed silence more than words. Slowly, the tremors inside her began to fade. She started reading again, painting again pieces of herself she'd tucked away while living in his shadow. One afternoon, I found her laughing with Mrs. Green in the garden, her hair pulled back, her face brighter than I'd seen in years. It was then I knew she was healing, not all at once, but little by little. The locket around her neck became something more than jewelry. It was her reminder that not all things could be stolen, not all trust could be broken. I would catch her pressing it between her fingers whenever doubt crept in, as if she were anchoring herself to the truth that she had survived. Sometimes she opened it and smiled at the tiny photo of us inside, whispering that she would never ignore her instincts again. That little oval of silver, once just a sentimental keepsake, had become a shield. Meanwhile, the world outside our home made sure her husband's fall was complete. The media dug into every corner of his life. Stories of fraud, betrayal, and deception splashed across every paper and screen. Those who once toasted to his success now distanced themselves in disgust. His partners, those slick men with their expensive suits, testified against him without hesitation. In the end, the empire he had bragged about was nothing more than a sandcastle, swept away in a single wave. The last time I saw him was in a courtroom, his wrists still bound, his once flawless hair unkempt. He looked smaller, thinner, like a man already devoured by the consequences he had tried to outrun. He didn't look at my daughter. He didn't look at me, only at the ground, as if the weight of his own arrogance was too much to bear. The sentence came quickly: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, years behind bars. No wealth, no allies, no escape. The man who once mocked me with smooth smiles and quiet threats was now a cautionary tale, alone in a prison cell. That was his justice, poetic in its simplicity. At home, my daughter began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were debts to untangle, accounts to close, letters from lawyers to sort. But she faced it all with a resilience I hadn't seen before. "If I can survive him," she said one evening, her hand over her locket, "I can survive anything." I watched her grow stronger, and with every step she took, I felt the burden on my chest grow lighter. For years, I had chosen endurance over confrontation, silence over conflict. But in the end, I had acted. And it was that choice, hard, terrifying, necessary, that saved her. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees and painted the sky in gold and violet, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. My daughter was humming softly in the kitchen, the sound warm and steady. I looked at her silhouette framed in the soft light and felt peace settle into my bones. I thought back to that first night, the moment I heard him whispering in the study. How my heart had raced, how I had nearly convinced myself to stay quiet. How silence seemed safer then, but silence would have cost everything. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, and let the truth wash over me like a calm tide. When I overheard his plan, he thought I would stay silent. But silence has never saved anyone. The house was quiet again, but it was not the same silence as before. It wasn't the silence of secrets or of fear. It was the kind that comes after a storm, when the air is fresh and the ground still glistens from rain. My daughter moved through the days slower at first, fragile like porcelain that could crack at a touch. She kept to herself, sleeping long hours, avoiding the phone that wouldn't stop buzzing with messages and news alerts about her husband's arrest. I stayed close. I cooked for her when she had no appetite, folded her laundry when she forgot it in the basket, sat with her at night when she could not find sleep. Some nights she cried, her voice breaking as she asked questions she didn't truly want answers to. Did he ever love me? Was it all a lie? I held her through those nights, whispering the truth gently, that her worth was never defined by his deceit, and that love, the real kind, never destroys. As days stretched into weeks, she began to rise again. Slowly, she returned to the pieces of herself she had left behind. She pulled out her paintbrushes, filling canvas after canvas with bursts of color, anger, grief, healing, hope. One morning, she made breakfast for the two of us, humming as she flipped pancakes, and I realized the worst of the shadows were lifting. The locket around her neck became her armor. She touched it constantly, as if drawing strength from it. One evening, she opened it, traced the tiny photo inside, and whispered, "This was always real. You and me." That locket, once a simple gift, had turned into her reminder that no matter how much was taken from her, some things could never be stolen. Outside her home, the world made sure her husband's fall was absolute. Every paper, every channel, every corner of the internet carried his name alongside words like fraud, betrayal, and collapse. His old partners abandoned him, feeding the courts with evidence to save themselves. Friends who once toasted to his success now refused to take his calls. His empire turned to ash, his arrogance to dust. I saw him once more in court. He looked small, nothing like the man who once strutted through rooms dripping with charm and control. His hair was unkempt, his suit ill-fitting, his eyes empty. He didn't look at my daughter. He didn't look at me. He only looked down, shackled not just by the cuffs around his wrists, but by the weight of everything he had lost. The verdict came quickly. Years in prison, stripped of his wealth, his name reduced to scandal, alone. forgotten. That was his justice, not revenge, but exposure, the kind of justice that left him with nothing but the echo of his own choices at home. My daughter flourished in small but steady ways. She sorted through her finances with Daniel's help, cut ties with the shadows of his debts, and began to imagine a future that belonged to her alone. If I survive this, she told me one evening, her fingers brushing the locket, I can survive anything. Her words carried strength I had never heard in her before. For me, the reflection was quieter but just as deep. I thought about all the years I had endured, silently years when keeping the peace felt safer than speaking, years when holding my tongue seemed like strength. But when the moment came, I had chosen differently. I had chosen action, even when my hands trembled, even when my daughter doubted me, even when silence tempted me again. That choice saved her. That choice saved us both. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the house in a golden glow, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. My daughter's voice carried softly from the kitchen as she sang to herself. I looked at her, strong again, free again, and peace settled over me like a blanket. I thought back to that first night, to the study door left ajar, to his voice whispering betrayal into the shadows. He had believed then that I would do what so many do, stay quiet, pretend not to hear, let life carry on while destruction brewed in silence. But silence has never saved anyone. I smiled faintly, set my cup down, and let the truth rest gently in my heart. When I overheard his plan, he thought I would stay silent, but silence has never saved anyone.